Chapter 36. The Land of Fairies. Shiva, Gopal and Kurush had been riding for a little over a month. Late winter made traveling through the harsh mountainous terrain a test of will. Shiva, who lived most of his life in the highlands of Tibet, managed the expedition quite well. But Gopal, who was used to the moist heat of the plains, was struggling due to the cold and rarefied atmosphere. "We're here," said Kurush out of the blue one day, as he raised his hand. Shiva pulled his reins. They had been on a narrow pathway, no more than 4 or 5 meters wide. Shiva dismounted from his horse, tied the reins to a rocky outcrop and walked up to Gopal to assist him. He tied Gopal's horse, helped him sit with his back propped up against the mountain side, and offered his water to the chief Vasudev. Gopal sipped the life-nurturing fluid slowly. Having helped his friend, Shiva looked around. To the left was a sheer, rocky mountainside, almost as steep as a cliff, which extended upwards for several hundred meters. To the right was a steep drop, to a dry valley far below. As far as the eye could see, there was no sign of any life anywhere. No human habitation, no animal, not even the few valiant plants and trees that they had seen at lower heights. Shiva looked at Gopal with raised eyebrows and whispered, "We're here?" Gopal gestured towards Kurush. The Parian was carefully running his hands over the mountain wall, his eyes shut, trying to locate something. He suddenly stopped. He had found what he was seeking. Shiva had moved up in the meantime and saw the faint indentation of a symbol on the mountainside. A figurative flame he had come to recognize, Fravashi. Kurush pressed the ring on his index finger into the center of the symbol. A block of rock, the size of a human head, emerged from the right. Kurush quickly placed both his hands on the rock, stepped back to get some leverage, and pushed hard. Shiva watched in wonder as the mountain seemed to come to life. A substantial section, nearly 4 meters across and 3 meters wide, receded inwards and then slid aside, revealing a pathway going deep into the mountain's womb. Kurush turned towards Shiva and indicated that they were good to go. Shiva helped Gopal onto his horse and handed the reins to his friend. As he walked towards his horse, he noticed that while the rocky outcrop where he had tethered his animal looked natural, in fact, it was man-made. Shiva mounted his horse and quickly joined Gopal and Kurush, riding into the heart of the mountain. The rocky concealed entrance had closed behind them just as smoothly. It would have been pitch dark inside except for a flaming torch that was maintained by the Parians on one of the walls, which threw its light ahead for a few meters. Beyond that, the light lost its struggle against the omnipresent darkness of the cavernous pathway. Kurush picked 3 unlit torches from a recess on the wall, lit them and handed one each to Gopal and Shiva. Thereupon he swiftly rode ahead, holding his torch aloft. Shiva and Gopal kicked their horses and made haste after him. Soon the pathway split into a fork, but Kurush unhesitatingly led them up one, disregarding the other. Just like the Nagas in the Dandak forests, the Vayuputras too had ensured that in the unlikely scenario of any unauthorized person finding his way into the secret pathway, he would inevitably get lost within the mountain, unless led by a Vayuputra guide. Shiva expected many more such misleading paths along the way. He was not disappointed. A half hour later, after a long monotonous ride, the travelers emerged on the other side of the mountain, almost blinded by the sudden onslaughts of bright sunlight. Even as his eyes adjusted, Shiva's jaw dropped with amazement as he took in what lay ahead. The other side of the mountain was dramatically different from what they had seen up to now. A broad, winding road had been cut into the sides of the mountain, called the Readout Avenue by the local Parians. A beautifully carved railing ran along its sides, affording protection for horses or carriages from slipping off the road to certain death in The sheer ravine below. The Vayuputra Avenue wound its way along the steep mountain in a gentle descent to the bottom. The valley itself, naturally dry as a bone, was surrounded on all sides by steep mountains. The splendor of nature notwithstanding, what Shiva was struck by was what the Parians had done with it. Hidden away from prying eyes, surrounded by unconquerable mountains, in this secluded spot, they had truly created a land of fairies, Pariah. The Vayuputra Avenue ended at the base of a terrace. This platform, though, unlike the ones built by the Meluhans, had not been constructed as protection against flood. The problem with water in Pariah was not one of excess but that of scarcity. The platform had been built to create a smooth base atop the rough, undulating, mountainous valley, allowing for the construction of massive structures upon it. The city of Pariah had been built on it. Kurush, Gopal and Shiva approached the platform at the lowest point of the valley. The platform was at its tallest here, nearly 20 meters high. A massive ceremonial gate had been erected at what was obviously the only entry point into the city. The road was surrounded by high walls on both sides, and narrowed down as it led to the well-barricaded gate. Looking admiringly around, the warrior in Shiva understood that the approach to the city gates perforce funneled an attacking force into a narrow neck, thus making defense easy for the Parians. The massive ornate city gates had been hewn out of the local brown stone that Shiva had frequently seen en route. The gate itself was flanked on either side by large pillars, on which crouched two imposing creatures, as if ready to pounce in defense of their city. This unfamiliar creature carried the head of a man on the body of a lion and sprouted the broad wings of an eagle. Parian pride was unmistakable in the features of the face: a sharp forehead held high, a hooked nose, neatly beaded beard, a drooping mustache and lengthy locks emerging from under a square hat. The aggressive, warrior-like visage was tempered somewhat by calm, almost friendly eyes. Shiva noted that Kurush's conversation with the gatekeeper was done. He walked back and spoke respectfully to Gopal. "My lord, the formalities have been completed. Please accept my apologies that it took us so long to get here. Shall we?" "There's no need for an apology, Kurush," said Gopal politely. "Let's go." Shiva quietly followed Kurush and Gopal, keenly aware of the gatekeeper's quizzical, perhaps even judgmental eyes. They crossed a massive tiled courtyard, guiding their horses onto the cobbled pathway leading to the top of the platform. The gradient was gentle, making it easy to negotiate the single hairpin bend they encountered. A few pedestrians sauntered along the accompanying steps, provided with long treads to facilitate the climb. All along the pathway, the rock face of the platform had been carved and painted. Against the relief of glazed tiles, sculpted Parians gazed at passers-by with their distinguished features. Long coats and square hats. As if from nowhere, water rippled down the center of the rock face, leaving a lilting musical sound in its wake. Shiva made a mental note to ask Gopal the secret of this water source in the harsh desert. Shiva's questions were quickly forgotten as he reached the top and exclaimed with wonder at the sheer beauty of all that he beheld. By the holy lake! He had just had his first vision of the exquisite, symmetrical gardens of Pariah. These artificial heavenly creations were so extraordinary that Parians had named them Paradsa, the walled place of harmony. The Paradsa extended along the central axis of the rectangular city, with buildings built around it. The park and the city extended all the way to the edge of a great mountain at the upper end of the valley, which had been named the Mountain of Mercy. By the Ajras, a water channel emerged from the heart of the mountain, flowing through the garden in an unerringly straight line, filling up large square ponds. Intermittently, the ponds themselves had flamboyant fountains constructed in the center, spewing water high into the air. The left and right halves of the gardens, divided by the water channel, were perfect mirror images of each other. The entire expanse was covered with a carpet of thick and carefully manicured grass, which provided the base, around which flower beds and trees were arranged in perfect harmony. The flora had obviously been imported from around the world: roses, narcissus, tulips, lilacs, jasmine, orange and lemon trees dotted the landscape in poetic profusion. Shiva was so lost in the beauty of the garden that he didn't hear his friend call. "Lord Nilkanth?" repeated Gopal. Shiva turned to the chief Vasudev. "We can always come back here, my friend. But for now, we need to retire to our guest house." Shiva and Gopal had been housed in the state guest house, reserved for elite visitors to Paria. Here too, the duo encountered the Parian obsession with beauty and elegance. Dismounting from their horses, Shiva and Gopal strode into the building. The entrance led to a wide, comfortable veranda lined with neat rows of perfectly circular columns, providing support to a great stone ceiling. The columns were colored a vivid pink all the way to the top, at which point, near the ceiling, it contained discreet etchings of animal figurines. Shiva squinted to get a better look. "Bulls," remarked Shiva. Bulls and cows were sacred amongst the Indians, central to the spiritual experience of life. "Yes," confirmed Gopal. "Bulls are revered by the Parians as well. They're symbolic of strength and virility." As they reached the other end of the veranda, they encountered three elegantly dressed Parians. The one in front held out a tray with warm, moistened and scented towels. Gopal immediately picked one up and went on to wipe the accumulated dust and grime from his face and hands. Shiva followed his example. A Parian woman walked up to Gopal, bowed low and spoke softly. "Welcome, honored Chief Vasudev Gopal. We can scarce believe our good fortune in hosting the representative of the great Lord Ram." "Thank you, my lady," said Gopal. "But you have me at a disadvantage. You know my name and I do not know yours." "My name is Bamandukt." "The daughter of Baman?" said Gopal, for he was familiar with their old language. "Avesta." Bamandukt smiled. "That is one of the meanings, yes. But I prefer the other one." "And, what is that?" "A maiden with a good mind. I'm sure you live by that name, my lady." "I try my best, Lord Gopal." Gopal smiled and folded his hands into a namaste. Unlike most Parians who had studiously ignored Shiva all this time, Bamandukt addressed the Nilkanth with a polite bow. "Welcome, Lord Shiva. I do hope we have given you no cause for complaint." "None at all," said Shiva graciously. "I know you are here on a mission," said Bamandukt. "I do not make so bold as to speak for my entire tribe, but I personally hope that you succeed. India and Paria are intertwined by ancient bonds. If something needs to be done that is in the interest of your country, I believe it is our duty to help. It is the dictate that Lord Jayudra laid down for us." Shiva acknowledged the courtesy and held his hands together in a namaste. "That spirit is returned in full measure by my country, Lady Bamandukt." Bamandukt glanced at a woman standing at the back towards the end of the lobby. Shiva's eyes followed her and rested on a tall woman, dressed in traditional Parian garb. Despite the attire, it was obvious that she wasn't native to Paria. Bronze complexioned with jet black hair, she had large attractive doe eyes and a voluptuous body, unlike the slender locals. She was a gorgeous woman indeed. "Lord Shiva," said Bamandukt, pulling the Nilkanth's attention back. "My aide fault will show you to your chamber." "Thank you," said Shiva. As Gopal and Shiva were escorted away, the Nilkanth looked back. The mystery woman had disappeared. Shiva and Gopal were led into a lavish suite of rooms with two separate bed chambers. The suite had been furnished with every luxury imaginable. Door-length windows at the far end opened onto a huge balcony with large recliners and a couple of cloth-covered soundproofs that could double up as tables. The living room contained a mini fountain on the side, its cascading waters creating a soothing tinkle. Delicately woven wall-to-wall plush carpets covered every inch of the floor. Bolsters and cushions of various sizes were strewn on the carpets at several corners, making comfortable floor seating areas. An ornately carved oak table was placed in one corner, accompanied with cushioned chairs. On the side, another corner was occupied by pairing musical instruments, keeping in mind the role of leisure and hospitality. Lavish gold and silver plated accoutrements decorated the mantelpiece and shelves on the walls. This was ostentatious even by the standards of Swadweepan royalty. The two bedrooms had comfortable soft beds with silk linen. Bowls of fruit had been thoughtfully placed on low tables next to the beds. Even clothes had been specially ordered and placed in cupboards for the two guests, including traditional pairing cloaks. Shiva looked at Gopal with a twinkle in his eye and chortled, "I think these miserable quarters will have to suffice." Gopal joined in mirthfully. Chapter 37. Unexpected Help. After a sumptuous dinner, Gopal and Shiva were back in their chambers, welcoming the opportunity for relaxation and inactivity. The fountain in the room having drawn his attention, Shiva quipped, "Panditji, where do they get the water from?" "For this fountain?" asked Gopal. "For all the fountains, ponds and channels that we have seen. Quite frankly, building this city and these gardens would have required a prodigious amount of water. This is a desert land with almost no natural rivers. I was told that they don't even have regular rains. So where does this water come from?" "They owe it to the brilliance of their engineers." "How so?" "There are massive natural springs and aquifers to the north of Paria. That is water within the rocks and the ground, right?" "Yes. But springs can never be as bountiful." "True, but scarcity engenders ingenuity. When you don't have enough water, you learn to use it judiciously. All the fountain and canal water that you see in the city is recycled wastewater." Shiva, who had dipped his hand into the fountain water, immediately recoiled. Gopal laughed softly. "Don't worry, my friend. That water has been treated and completely cleaned. It's even safe to drink. I'll take your word for it." Gopal smiled as Shiva judiciously wiped his hands with a sanitized napkin. "How far away are these springs and aquifers?" "The ones that supply this city are a good 50 to 100 kilometers away," answered Gopal. Shiva whistled softly. "That's a long distance. How do they get the water here in such large quantities? I haven't seen any canals." "Oh, they have canals. But you can't see them as they are underground." "They've built underground canals?" asked Shiva, stunned. "They are not as broad as the canals we have back home. But they serve the purpose. They built canals that are the size of underground drains, which begin at the aquifers and springs. But 100 kilometers is a long way to transport water. How do they do that?" "Do they have underground pumps powered by animals?" "No. They use one of the most powerful forces of nature to do the job." "What?" "Gravity. They built underground channels with gentle gradients that slope over 100 kilometers. The water naturally flows down due to the force of gravity." "Brilliant. But building something like this would require precision engineering skills of a high order." "You're right. The angle of the descent would have to be absolutely exact over very long distances. If the gradient is even slightly higher than required, the water would begin to erode the bottom of the channel, destroying it over time. And if the slope is a little too gentle, the water would simply stop flowing." "Exactly," said Gopal. "You can imagine the flawless design and execution required, in implementing a project such as this." "But when do they?" Shiva was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. He immediately lowered his voice to an urgent whisper. Panditji, were you expecting someone? Gopal shook his head. No. And, where is our guard? Isn't he supposed to announce visitors? Shiva pulled out his sword, indicating to Gopal that he should follow him, as he tiptoed to the door. The safest place for him was behind Shiva. The Vasudev chief was a Brahmin and not a warrior. Shiva waited near the door. The soft knock was heard again. Shiva turned and whispered to Gopal. As soon as I pull the intruder in, shut the door. And lock it. Shiva held his sword to the side, pulled the door open and in one smooth motion yanked the intruder into the room, pushing the Parian to the ground. Gopal, moving just as rapidly, shut the door and bolted it. I'm a friend, spoke a feminine voice, her hands raised in surrender. Shiva and Gopal stared at the woman on the ground, her face covered with a veil. She slowly got up, keeping her eyes fixed on Shiva's sword. You don't need that. Parians do not kill their guests. It is one of Lord Drayuda's laws. Shiva refused to lower his blade. Reveal yourself, he commanded. The woman removed her veil. You've seen me earlier, Great Neelkanth. Shiva recognized the intruder immediately. It was the dark-haired mystery woman he had seen in the lobby while he'd been talking to Bamandukt. Shiva smiled. I was wondering when I would see you next. I've come to help, said the woman, still unable to tear her eyes away from the sword. So I'll repeat that you really don't need that. We Parians will never break Lord Ayudra's laws. Shiva sheathed his sword. What makes you think we need your help? For the same reason that you don't need your sword here, we Vayuputras never break Lord Ayudra's laws. I am here to help you get what you came for. Shiva and Gopal joined the lady, having made her comfortable on the soft cushions. What is your name? Asked Shiva. Why do you want to help us? My name is Scheherazade. Scheherazade was a name that harked back to ancient Parian roots, a person who gives freedom to cities. Shiva narrowed his eyes. That is a lie. You're not from this land. What is your real name? I am a Parian. This is my name. How can we trust you if you don't even tell us your real name? My name has nothing to do with your mission. What the Amartish Pand, the Vayuputra Council, think of your mission is what truly matters. And you can tell us what they think? Asked Gopal. That's why I am here. I can tell you what you need to do to fulfill your mission. The Mitra was a ceremonial title for the chief of the Vayuputra tribe. It literally translated as friend, for he was the deepest friend of the Vayuputra god, the Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda was a formless god, much like the Hindu concept of Paramatma. And Mitra was his representative on earth. Lord Drayuda had mandated that the ancient title of Mitra be used for the chief Vayuputra. Once a man became the Mitra, all his earlier identities were erased, including his old name. He even dissociated himself completely from his former family. Everyone was to know him thereafter as Mitra. Mitra was in the antechamber of his office, when he heard a soft noise from the veranda. The nascent moon cast a faint light, impairing vision, but Mitra knew who it was as he walked over. He heard a soft, feminine voice call out in a whisper, Great Mitra, I have sent her Tatham. Thank you, Bamandukt. The Vayuputras will be indebted to you in perpetuity, for you have helped our tribe fulfill our mission and our vow to Lord Drayudra. Bamandukt bowed low. There had been a time when she had loved the man who'd become the Mitra. But once he had assumed his office as the chief, the only feelings she had allowed herself were those of devotion and respect. She stepped away quietly. The Mitra stared at Bamandukt's retreating form and then returned to the antechamber. He sat on a simple chair, leaned back and closed his eyes. The ancient memory was still fresh in his mind, as if it had all happened yesterday, the conversation with his close friend and brother-in-law, Minabu. Are you sure, Minabu? asked the Parine, who would go on to become the Mithra. The Tibetan feigned outrage as he looked at his friend and fellow Vayaputra. I mean no disrespect, Manabu. But I hope you realize that what we're doing is illegal. Manabu allowed himself a slight smile as he scratched his shaggy beard. His matted hair had been tied up in a bun with a string of beads, in the style favored by his tribe. The fierce Gunas. His body was covered with deep scars acquired from a lifetime of battle. His tall, muscular physique was always in a state of alertness, ever ready for war. His demeanor, his clothes, his hair, all conveyed the impression of a ruthless warrior. But his eyes were different. They were a window to his calm mind, one that had found its purpose and was at peace. Manabu's eyes had always intrigued the Parine, compelling him to become a follower. If you are unsure, my friend, said Manabu, you don't have to do this. The Parine looked away. Don't feel pressure to do this just because you're related to me, continued Manabu, whose brother had married the Parine's sister. The Parine returned his gaze. How does the reason matter? What matters is the result. What matters is whether Lord Ryuda's commandment is being followed. Manabu continued to lock gaze with the Parine, his eyes mirthful. You should know Lord Ryuda's commandments better than I do. After all, he was a Parine. Like you. The Parine stole a look at the back of the room nervously, where a diabolical mixture was boiling inside a vessel, the fire below it steady and even. Manabu stepped forward and put his hand on the Parine's shoulder. Trust me, the Samras is turning evil. Lord Ryuda would have wanted us to do this. If the council doesn't agree, then the hell with them. We will ensure that Lord Ryuda's commandments are followed. The Parine looked at Manabu and sighed. Are you sure that your nephew has the potential to fulfill this mission? That he can one day be the successor to Lord Ryuda? Manabu smiled. He's your nephew too. His mother is your sister. I know. But the boy doesn't live with me. He lives with you, in Tibet. I have never met him. I don't know if I ever will. And you refuse to even tell me his name. So I ask again. Are you sure he is the one? Yes, Manabu was confident in his belief. He is the one. He will grow up to be the Nilkanth. He will be the one who will carry out Lord Ryuda's commandment. He will take evil out of the equation. But he needs to be educated. He needs to be prepared. I will prepare him. But what is the point? The Vayaputra Council controls the emergence of the Nilkanth. How will our nephew be discovered? I'll arrange it at the right time, said Manabu. The Parine frowned. But how will you? Leave that to me, interrupted Manabu. If he is not discovered, it will mean that the time for evil has not yet come. On the other hand, if I'm able to ensure that he is discovered, then we will know that evil has risen, said the Parine, completing Manabu's sentence. Manabu shook his head, disagreeing partially with his brother-in-law. To be more precise, we would know that good has turned into evil. The conversation was interrupted by a soft hissing sound from the far corner of the room. The medicine was ready. The two friends walked over to the fire and peered into the vessel. A thick reddish-brown paste had formed, small bubbles were bursting through to the surface. It only needs to cool down now. The task is done, said the Parine. Manabu looked at his brother-in-law. No, my friend. The task has just begun. The Mithra breathed deeply as he came back to the present. He whispered, I never thought that our rebellion would succeed, Manabu. He rose from his chair, walked over to the veranda and looked up at the sky. In the old days, his people believed that great men, once they had surrendered their mortal flesh, went up to live among the stars and keep watch over them all. Mithra focused his eyes on one particular star and smiled. Manabu, it was a good idea to name our nephew Shiva. A good clue to help me guess that he is the one. To begin with, let me tell you that most of the Vayuputras are against you, said Scheherazade. That's not really much of a secret, said Shiva wryly. Look, you can't blame the Vayuputras. Our laws state very clearly that only one of us, from amongst those who are authorized by the Vayuputra tribe, can become the Nilkanth. You have emerged out of nowhere. The laws don't allow us to recognize or help someone like you. And yet, you are here, said Shiva. I don't think you're working alone. You were standing right at the back, almost hidden, when I saw you in the lobby. I bet you are not a fully accepted Parine. I can't see someone like you having the courage to do this all by yourself. Some powerful Parians are putting you up to it. Which makes me believe that some Vayuputras realize what I am saying is true, that evil has risen. Scheherazade smiled softly. Yes. There are some very powerful Vayuputras who are on your side. But they cannot help you openly. Unlike most of the earlier Nilkanth pretenders, your blue throat is genuine. This leads to one inescapable conclusion: some Vayuputra has helped you many decades ago. Can you imagine the chaos this has caused? There were unprecedented accusations flying thick and fast after your emergence. People within Paria were accusing each other of having broken Lord Ryudra's laws and helping you clandestinely when you were young. It was tearing the Vayuputras apart till Lord Mitra put an end to it. He held that our tribe has not authorized you as the Nilkanth, and perhaps it was the doing of someone from within your own country. So, if any Vayuputra helps me, he will be seen as the traitor who started it all, many years ago. Exactly, answered Scheherazade. What is the way out? Asked Gopal. You, my Lord Chief Vasudev, must lead the mission, said Scheherazade. Lord Shiva must stay in the background. Don't ask for assistance to be provided for the Nilkanth. But to you as a member of the Vasudev tribe, seeking justice, they cannot say no to a just demand from the representative of Lord Ram. I am sorry? I didn't understand. What does the Nilkanth need, Lord Gopal? Asked Scheherazade. He needs the Brahmastra to threaten Meluha. How did you? With due respect, don't ask superfluous questions, Lord Gopal. What Lord Shiva and you need is obvious. We have to devise the best way for you to get it. If you ask for the Brahmastra so that you can fight evil, then you will open yourself to questions as to Lord Shiva's legitimacy in deciding what evil is, for we all know that he has not been authorized or trained by the Vayuputras. Instead, seek redress for a crime committed on Indian soil by a person who the Vayuputras have supported in the past. And what crime was that? The unauthorized use of Devyastras. Lord Brigu, said Gopal, remembering the great Maharishi's use of the divine weapons in Panchavati. Exactly. The laws of Lord Ryudra make it clear that for the first unauthorized use of Devi Astras, the punishment is a 14-year exile into the forests. A second unauthorized use is punishable by death. Many in the council agree that Lord Brigu has got away lightly, despite having used Devyastras. So the Vasudevs are to present themselves as the ones enforcing the justice of Lord Ryudra? Exactly. It is impossible for Vayuputra to say no to this. You should state that the law on the Devyastra ban was broken, and those who did this, Lord Brigu, the Emperor of Meluha and the King of Ayodhya, need to be punished. And, the Vasudevs have decided to mete out justice. And we can tell the Vayuputras, said Shiva, completing Scheherazade's thought, that they may well have more reserves of Devyastras. So we need the Brahmastra to encourage them to do the right thing. Scheherazade smiled. Use the laws to achieve your objective. Once you have the Brahmastra, use it to threaten the Meluhans. Evil must be stopped. But I've been asked to tell you that you shouldn't. We will never use the Brahmastra, said Gopal, interrupting Scheherazade. It's not just about the laws of Lord Rayudra, added Shiva. Using a weapon of such horrifying power goes against the laws of humanity. Scheherazade nodded. When you meet the council, insist on speaking with Lord Mithra in private. Tell them it is a matter of the Devyastra law being broken. Say that the Vasudevs cannot allow those who broke Lord Rayudra's law to go unpunished. That will be enough. It will then be a private conversation between Lord Mithra and the two of you. You will get what you want. Shiva smiled as he understood who amongst the Vayuputras was helping him. But he was still intrigued by Scheherazade, or whatever her real name was. Why are you helping us? Asked Shiva. Because I've been told to do so. I don't believe that. Something else is driving you. Why are you helping us? Scheherazade smiled sadly and looked at the carpet. Then she turned towards the balcony, staring into the dark night beyond. She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and turned back towards Shiva. Because there was a man whom I had loved once, who had told me that the Samras was turning evil. And I didn't believe him at the time. Who is this man? Asked Gopal. It doesn't matter anymore, said Scheherazade. He is dead. He was killed, perhaps by those who'd wanted to stop him. Ending the reign of the Samras is my way of apologizing. Shiva leaned towards her, looked straight into Scheherazade's eyes and whispered. Tara? A stunned Scheherazade pulled back. Nobody had called her by that name in years. Shiva continued to observe her eyes. By the holy lake, he whispered. It is you. Scheherazade did not say anything. Her relationship with Brahaspati had been kept a secret. Many amongst the Parians believed that the Samras was still a force for good, and that the former chief scientist of Meluha was deeply biased and misguided about it. Tara would have preferred not having to live in Pariah as Scheherazade. But her presence here had served a purpose for her guru, Lord Brigu. Believing Brahaspati was dead, she had found no reason to return to her homeland. But you are Lord Brigu's student, said Shiva. Why are you going against him? I'm not Tara. I know you are, said Shiva. Why are you going against your guru? Do you believe that it was Lord Brigu who got Brahaspati killed at Mount Mandar? Scheherazade stood up and turned to leave. Shiva rose quickly, stretched out and held her hand. Brahaspati is not dead. A dumbstruck Scheherazade stopped dead in her tracks. Brahaspati is alive, said Shiva. He is with me. Tears poured from Scheherazade's eyes. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Shiva stepped forward and repeated gently. He is with me. Your Brahaspati is alive. Scheherazade kept crying, tears of confused happiness flowing down her cheeks. Shiva gently held her hand in his own. Tara, you will come back with us when we're done here. I'll take you back. I'll take you back to your Brahaspati. Scheherazade collapsed into Shiva's arms, inconsolable in her tears. She would be Tara once again. Chapter 38. The Friend of God. The strategy that Tara had suggested worked like a charm. The Amartyash Pand was genuinely taken by surprise when Gopal entered their audience chamber without Shiva. When he raised the issue of Maharishi Brigu's misuse of the Devyastras, they knew that they had been cornered. They had no choice but to grant Gopal an audience with the Mithra. That was the law. The following day, Shiva and Gopal were led into the official audience hall and residence of the Mithra. It had been built at one end of the city, the last building abutting the Mountain of Mercy. Unlike the rest of Pariah, this structure was incredibly modest. It had a simple base made of stone, which covered the water channel that emerged from the mountain. On it were constructed austere pillars, which supported a wooden roof 4 meters high. On entry, one immediately stepped into a simple audience hall, furnished with basic chairs and somber carpets. The Mithra's personal quarters lay Farther inside, separated by stone walls and a wooden door, Shiva could sense that this was almost a stone replica of a large ceremonial tent, the wooden tent poles having been converted to stone pillars and the cloth canopy into a wooden roof. In a way, this was a link to the nomadic past of Lord Ayuda's people, when everybody lived in simple, easily built tents that could be dismantled and moved at short notice. Like a tribal leader of the old code, the Mithra lived in penurious simplicity while his people lived in luxury. The only indulgence that the Mithra had allowed himself was the beautiful garden that surrounded his abode. It was bountiful in its design, precise in its symmetry and extravagant in its colorful flora. Shiva and Gopal were left alone in the audience hall, and the doors were shut. Within a few moments, the Mithra entered. Shiva and Gopal immediately stood up. They greeted the Mithra with the ancient Parian salute. The left hand was placed on the heart, fist open, as a mark of admiration. The right arm was held rigidly to the side of the body, bent upwards at the elbow. The open palm of the right hand faced outwards, as a form of greeting. The Mithra smiled genially and folded his hands together into the traditional Indian namaste. Shiva grinned, but remained silent, waiting for the Mithra to speak. The Mithra was a tall, fair-skinned man, dressed in a simple brown cloak. A white hat covered his long brownish hair, with tiny beads wrapped around separated strands of his beard, much like all Parians, though the sack-like cloak made it difficult to judge. His body seemed strong and muscular. Of interest to Shiva were his delicate hands with long, slender fingers, like those of a surgeon rather than a warrior. But Shiva was most intrigued by the Mithra's nose, sharp and long. It reminded him of his beloved mother. The Mithra walked up to Shiva and held the Nilkanth by his shoulders. "What a delight it is to finally see you." Shiva noted that the Mithra didn't even cursorily glance at his blue neck, something most people could not resist. The Mithra's attention was focused on Shiva's eyes. And then the Mithra said something even more intriguing. "You have your father's eyes. And your mother's nose." "He knew my father? And my mother?" Before Shiva could react, the Mithra gently touched Shiva's back, as he smiled at Gopal. "Come, let's sit." As soon as they had seated themselves, the Mithra turned towards the Nilkanth. "I can see the questions that are running through your mind. How do I know your father and mother? Who am I? What was my name before I became the Mithra?" Shiva smiled. "This eye-reading business is very dangerous. It doesn't allow one to have any secrets." "Sometimes, it's important that there be no secrets," said the Mithra, "especially when such big decisions are being taken. How else can we be sure that we have taken the right step?" "You don't have to answer if you don't wish to. The questions running in my mind are not important to our mission." "You are right. You have been trained well. These questions may trouble your mind, but they are not important." "But then, can we really carry out our mission with troubled minds?" "A troubled mind makes one lose sight of the mission," admitted Shiva. "And the world cannot afford to have you lose sight of your mission, great Nilkanth. You are too important for us. So let me answer your personal questions first." Shiva noticed that the Mithra had called him the Nilkanth, something which no Parian had, until now. "My name is not important," said the Mithra. "I don't hold that name anymore. My only identity is my title, the Mithra." Shiva nodded politely. "Now, how do I know your mother?" "Simple. I grew up with her. She was my sister." Shiva's eyes opened wide in surprise. "You are my uncle?" Mithra nodded. "I was your uncle before I became the Mithra." "Why have I not met you before?" "It's complicated. But suffice it to say that your father's brother, Lord Manabu, and I were good friends. I held him in deep regard. We decided to seal our friendship with a marriage between our two families. My sister went to live with Lord Manabu's brother in Tibet, after their wedding. And you were born from that union. But my uncle had rebellious ideas," said Shiva, trying to guess why the Mithra had been forced to keep his distance from their family. The Mithra shook his head. Manabu didn't have rebellious ideas. He had inspiring ideas. But an inspiration before its time appears like a rebellion. "So you were not forced by the Vayuputras to stay away from my family?" "Oh, I was forced all right. But not by the Vayuputras." Shiva smiled. Uncle Manabu could be stubborn at times. The Mithra smiled. "When did you know that I was your long-lost relative?" asked Shiva. "Did you have spies following me?" "I recognized you the moment I heard your name." "Didn't you know my name?" "No, Manabu refused to tell me. Now I understand why. It was a clue he'd left for me. If you emerged at all, I would recognize you by your name." "How so?" asked Shiva, intrigued. "Almost nobody, even from amongst the Vayuputras, knows that Lord Rudra's mother had a special and personal name for him, Shiva." "What?" "Yes. Lord Rudra's name means the one who roars. He was named so because when he was born, he cried so loudly that he drove the midwife away." "I have heard that story," said Shiva. "But I have not heard the one about Lord Rudra's mother calling him Shiva. It's a secret that only a few Vayuputras are aware of. Legend holds that Lord Rudra was actually stillborn." "What?" asked a genuinely surprised Gopal. "Yes," said the Mithra. "The midwife and Lord Rudra's mother tried very hard to revive him. Finally, the midwife tried something very unorthodox. She tried to breastfeed the stillborn Lord Rudra. Much to his mother's surprise, the baby actually started breathing. And, as history recalls, roared loudly." "By the holy lake," whispered Shiva. "What a fascinating story." "Yes, it is. The midwife walked away soon thereafter, and was never heard of again. Lord Rudra's mother, who was an immigrant and a believer in the mother goddess Shakti, was convinced that the midwife had been sent by the goddess to save her son. She believed her son was born as a body without life, a Shava, whom goddess Shakti had infused with life. Therefore, she felt the goddess had converted a Shava to Shiva, or the auspicious one. So she started calling her son Shiva, in honor of the mother goddess and in acknowledgement of the state in which her son was born. An enthralled Shiva listened in rapt attention to the Mithra. "So," said the Mithra, "the moment I heard your name, I knew that Manabu had left a clue for me about you being the one he had trained." "So you knew that Lord Manabu was planning this?" The Mithra smiled. "Your uncle and I made the medicine together." "You mean the medicine that is responsible for my throat turning blue?" "Yes. But didn't that have to be given to me at a specific time in my life?" "I'm assuming that is what Manabu did, for here you are." "But Lord Mithra, this is not the way the system was supposed to work, as an unfolding series of implausible coincidences. There are so many things that could have gone wrong. To begin with, I may not have been trained well. Or the medicine may not have been given to me at the right time. I may never have been invited to Meluha. And worst of all, I may not have stumbled upon the Samras as the true evil." "You are right. This is not the way our Vayuputra system was designed to work. But Manabu and I had faith that this is the way the universe's system is supposed to work. And it did, didn't it? But is it right to leave such significant outcomes to a roll of the universe's dice? You make it sound as if it was all left to dumb luck. We didn't leave it only to chance." "Shiva. The Vayuputras were sure the Samras had not turned evil. Manabu and I felt otherwise. Had Manabu been alive, he would have guided you through this period, but in spite of his untimely death, good prevailed. Manabu always said let us allow the universe to make the decision, and it did. We decided to set in motion a chain of events. which it would work out only if the universe willed it so. Frankly, I wasn't sure. But I didn't stop him. I just didn't think his plan would succeed. I did help him in making the medicine, though. And when I saw the plan coming to fruition, I knew that it was my duty to do whatever I could to help. But what if I had failed? What if I hadn't identified the Samras as evil? Then evil would have won, right? Sometimes, the universe decides that evil is supposed to win. Perhaps a race or species becomes so harmful that it's better to allow evil to triumph and destroy that species. It has happened before. But this is not one of those times. Shiva was clearly overwhelmed by the number of things that could have gone wrong. You are still troubled by something, said the Mithra. I've talked to Pandaji as well, about this, said Shiva, pointing to Gopal. So much of what I have achieved in my mission can be attributed to pure luck, just a random turn of the universe. The Mithra bent forward towards Shiva and whispered, one makes one's own luck, but you have to give the universe the opportunity to help you. Shiva remained stoic, not quite convinced by the Mithra's words. You had every reason to turn away after arriving in Meluha for the first time. You were in a strange new land. Peculiar people, who were evidently so much more advanced than you, insisted on looking upon you as a god. You were tasked with a mission, the enormity of which would have intimidated practically anyone in the world. I'm sure that at the time, you didn't even think you could succeed. And yet, you didn't run away. You stood up and accepted a responsibility that was thrust upon you. That decision was the turning point in your journey against evil, which had nothing to do with the twists and blessings of fate. Shiva looked at Gopal, whose demeanor suggested he was in full agreement with the Mithra. You are giving me too much credit, Lord Mithra, said Shiva. I am not, said the Mithra. You are on course to fulfill my mission, without having taken any help from me. But I will not allow you to do that. You must give me the privilege of offering some help. Otherwise, how will I face the Ahura Mazda and Lord Rudra when I meet with them? Shiva smiled. The Mithra looked directly into Shiva's eyes. But there are some things I must be sure of. What do you plan to do with the Devyastra? I plan to use it to threaten. Shiva stopped speaking as the Mithra raised his hand. I've seen enough, said the Mithra. Shiva frowned. Thoughts move faster than the tongue, great Nilkanth. I know you will not use these terrible weapons of destruction. I can also see that the reason you will not do so is not just because of the Vayuputra ban, but because you believe that these weapons are too horrifying to ever be used. I do believe that. But I cannot give you the Brahmastra. This was unexpected. Shiva had thought the discussion had been going his way. I cannot give you the Brahmastra because it is too uncontrollable. It destroys anything and everything. Most importantly, its effect spreads out in circles. The worst destruction is in the epicenter, where everything living is instantly incinerated into thin air. While there is less destruction in the outer circles, the damage is still significantly widespread in the vicinity. So even if those outside the primary impact zone are not immediately killed, they suffer from the immense radiation unleashed by the Astra. With Lord Brigu on the other side, he is sure to bet that you are using the weapon only as a threat, because you would not want to hurt your own army, which would most certainly be in the zone of radiation exposure. So what is the way forward? The Pashupashastra. It is a weapon designed by Lord Rudra. It has all the power of the Brahmastra, but with much greater control. Its destruction is concentrated in the inner circle. Life outside this zone is not impacted at all. In fact, with the Pashupashastra, you can even focus the effect in only one direction, leaving everyone else in the other directions safe. If you threaten to use this weapon, Lord Brigu will know that you can destroyed Devagiri without endangering your people or the adjoining areas, then the threat will be credible. This made sense. Shiva agreed. But you cannot actually use the weapon, Nilkanth, reiterated the Mithra. It will poison the area for centuries. The devastation is unimaginable. I give you my word, Lord Mithra, said Shiva. I will never use these weapons. The Mithra smiled. Then I have no problems in offering the Pashupashastra to you. I will give the orders immediately. Shiva raised his chin as a faint smile played on his lips. I think you had already made your decision about this, even before you met me, uncle. The Mithra laughed softly. I am just Mithra. But you didn't expect it to be so easy, right? No, I didn't. I have heard stories about you, especially about the way you have fought your battles. You have behaved in an exemplary manner until now. Even when you could have gained by doing something wrong, you refrained from doing so. You didn't fall prey to the logic of doing a small wrong for the sake of the greater good, of the ends justifying the means. That takes moral courage. So yes, I had already made up my mind. But I wanted to see you in any case. You will be remembered as the greatest man of our age. Generations will look up to you as their god. How could I not want to meet you? I am no god, Lord Mithra, said an embarrassed Shiva. Wasn't it you who had said Har Har Mahadev? That all of us are gods? Shiva laughed. You've got me there. We don't become gods because we think we are gods, said the Mithra. That is only a sign of ego. We become gods when we realize that a part of the universal divinity lives within us, when we understand our role in this great world and when we strive to fulfill that role. There is nobody striving harder than you, Lord Nilkanth. That makes you a god. And remember, gods don't fail. You cannot fail. Remember what your duty is. You have to take evil out of the equation. You shouldn't destroy all traces of the Samras, for it may become good in times to come, when it might be required once again. You have to keep the knowledge of the Samras alive. You will also have to create a tribe which will manage the Samras till it is required once again. Once all this is done, your mission will be over. I will not fail, Lord Mithra, said Shiva. I promise. I know you will succeed, smiled the Mithra, before turning to Gopal. Great chief Vasudev, once the Nilkanth creates his own tribe, the Vayuputras will not remain in charge of fighting evil anymore. It will be the task of the Nilkanth's tribe. Our relationship with the Vasudevs will become like one between distant relatives rather than the one which has entailed a joint duty towards a common cause. Your relationship with the Vasudevs and with my country will exist forever, Lord Mithra, said Gopal. You have helped us in our hour of need. I'm sure that, in turn, we will help Pariah if it ever needs us. Thank you, said the Mithra. Chapter 39. He is one of us. The Mithra called the entire city to the town center the following morning. Shiva and Gopal stood next to him as he addressed the crowd. My fellow Vayuputras, I'm sure your minds are teeming with many questions and doubts. But this is not the time for that, this is the time for action. We trusted a man who had worked closely with us, we trusted him with our knowledge. But he betrayed us. Lord Brika broke the laws of Lord Rayudra. Lord Gopal, the chief of the Vasudevs and the representative of Lord Ram, has come here demanding justice. But, in this moment, it is not just about retribution for what Lord Brigu has done. It's also about justice for India, justice to Lord Rayudra's principles. There is a purpose that we all serve, Parians. It is beyond laws, it is one that was defined by Lord Rayudra himself. Pointing at Shiva, the Mithra continued. Behold this man. He may not be a Vayuputra, but he does bear the blue throat. He may not be a Parine, but he fights like one, with honor and integrity. We may not have recognized him, but the Vasudevs consider him the Nilkanth. He may not have lived amongst us, but he respects and idolizes Lord Rayudra as much as we do. Above all, he is fighting for Lord Rayudra's cause. The Vayuputras listened with rapt attention. Yes, he is not a Vayuputra, and yet he is one of us. I am supporting him in his battle against evil. And so shall you. Many amongst the Vayuputras were swayed by the Mithra's words. Those who weren't were nevertheless aware that it was within the Mithra's legal rights to choose whom to support within India. So, while their reasons to do so may have differed, all the Vayuputras fell in line with the Mithra's decision. Shiva and Gopal received a large crate the following evening. An entire Parine cavalry platoon had been arranged to transport this incredibly heavy trunk safely back to the sea. Never having seen the material of the Pashupashastra, Shiva assumed from the size of the trunk that they were carrying a huge quantity, probably enough to threaten an entire city. He was therefore amazed by Gopal's clarification that they were carrying only a handful of the Pashupashastra material. Are you serious? Yes, Lord Nilkanth, said Gopal. Just a handful is enough to destroy entire cities. The trunk has massive insulation, made of lead and wet clay, besides the leaves of imported bilva trees. Together, these will protect us from exposure to the Pashupashastra radiation. By the holy lake, said Shiva. The more I learn about the Devyastras, the more I'm convinced that they are the weapons of the demons. They are, my friend. That's why Lord Rayudra called them evil and banned their use. That is also why we will not use the Pashupashastra. We'll only threaten to use it. But to make it a credible threat to the Meluhans, we will actually have to set up the weapon outside Devagiri. Do you know how to do that? No, I don't. Most of the Vayuputras are not privy to that knowledge either, only a select few are authorized to be in the know. There is a combination of engineering, construction, mantras and other preparations that we would have to follow in order to set up this weapon. We would have to do this properly so as to convey a credible threat to Lord Brigu, since he does know how the Pashupashastra is prepared for use. Lord Mitra and his people will commence our training from tomorrow morning. Parvateshwar moved his attention away from those sitting with him and casted a look outside the window of the Kurukapa governor's residence. They were on the Dvitiya, or second platform of the city, and from this height, Parvateshwar had a clear view of the western sea, which stretched far into the horizon. The sea is the only way we have, said Parvateshwar. Brigu and Dilipa turned towards Parvateshwar. Dilipa's Indian army had finally arrived in Meluha, many months after the Battle of Devagiri. They had sailed on to Kurukapa to join Parvateshwar's Suryavanshi forces. But General, isn't that the entire idea behind coming to Kurukapa? Asked Dilipa. To attack Lothal by sea? What's new about that idea? I'm not talking about attacking the city, Your Highness. While there were now 400,000 troops based in Kurukapa under the command of Parvateshwar, he knew that it was not really enough to defeat a well-entrenched force of 250,000 in the well-designed citadel of Lothal. And despite all attempts at provocation, Sati had resolutely refused to step out of Lothal, thus giving Parvateshwar no opportunity to bring his numerical superiority into play in an open battlefield. The war had, for all practical purposes, ground to a stalemate. Please explain, General, said Brigu, hoping the Meluhan army chief had come up with some brilliant idea to end the stalemate. What is your plan? I think we should send forth a fleet towards the Narmada River, making sure that these ships are visible. Dilipa frowned. Have your spies discovered the route that Lord Shiva took? The Meluhans were aware that Shiva and Gopal had sailed to the Narmada, but they had lost track of them thereafter. They assumed that the duo may have used the Narmada route to steal into Panjavati or Ujjain. To what purpose, was still a mystery to the Meluhans. No, answered Parvachwar. Then what's the point of making our ships sail out in that direction? The Nilkants. Scouts and spies will surely get to know that our ships are sailing to the Narmada. We'll lose the element of surprise. That is precisely what I want, said Parvachwar. We don't want to hide. By the great Lord Brahma! Exclaimed an impressed Brigu. General Parvachwar. Have you discovered the Narmada route to Panchavati? No, my lord. Then I don't understand. Oh right. Brigu stopped mid-sentence as he finally understood what Parvachwar had in mind. I'm not aware of the Narmada route to Panchavati, said Parvachwar. But the Lord Nilkant's army doesn't know that I don't know. They may assume that we have discovered this precious route and that the Lord's life is in danger. Furthermore, the Nagas are a substantial segment of the warriors in that army. Will they keep quiet in the face of an imminent danger to their capital Panchavati, the city established by their goddess Bhumidevi? They will be forced to sail out of Lothal, said Dileepa. Exactly, said Parvachwar. Since our contingent will be approximately 50 ships, they will have to match our numbers. We will make our ships wait in ambush in a lagoon far beyond the Narmada Delta. And once they've begun sailing up the Narmada, we'll charge in from behind and attack them, said Dileepa. No, said Parvachwar. No? Asked a surprised Dileepa. No, Your Highness. I intend to send out a crack team of commandos in advance, to the Narmada. They will wait for the Naga ships to race upriver, till they have traveled a considerable distance away from the sea. Naval movements in a river are constricted. No matter how large the river, their fleet will be sailing close to each other. Our commandos will have devil boats with firewood and flints ready for our enemies. Our task will be to take out the first as well as last line of ships simultaneously. Brilliant! They will lose their fleet, their soldiers will be adrift. Then our own fleet can charge in from the hidden lagoon and cut their soldiers down. No, Your Highness, said Parvachwar, thinking he wouldn't have needed to explain all this to someone with the strategic brilliance of Shiva. Our fleet is not going to engage in battle at all. It's only a decoy. Our main attack will be carried out by the commandos. If the first and last line of the enemy ships are set on fire, there's a pretty good chance that all the ships in between two will eventually catch fire. But won't that take too long? Asked Brigu. Many of their soldiers would be able to abandon ship and escape onto land. True, said Parvachwar. But they will be stranded far from their base with no ships. I had learned at Panjavati that there is no road between Lothal and the Narmada. It will take them at least 6 months to march back to Lothal through those dense, impenetrable forests. I'm hoping that on seeing the size of our decoy fleet, Sati will commit at least 100,000 men to attack us. And with those 100,000 enemy soldiers stuck in the jungles of the Narmada, our army would become vastly superior numerically, a ratio of almost 4 to 1. We could then attack and probably take Lothal. Dileepa still hadn't understood the entire plan. But many of our own soldiers will also be in the decoy fleet, right? So we'll have to wait for them to come back to Gurukapa and then. I'm not planning on using our decoy fleet to engage in battle, said Parvachwar. So we're not going to load them up with soldiers. We'll only keep a skeletal staff, enough to set sail. We will not commit more than 5,000 men. Imagine what we can achieve. Only 5,000 of our men, including the commandos, will leave Gurukapa. But we would have removed nearly 100,000 of the enemy men, leaving them stranded in the jungles around the Narmada, at least 6 months away from Lothal. and not a single arrow would have been fired. We can then go ahead and easily march in to capture Lothal. Brilliant! Said Brigu. We will move towards Lothal as soon as our ships leave for the Narmada. No, my lord, said Parvachwar. I'm sure Sati has scouts lurking in and around Kurakapa. If they see 400,000 of our troops marching out of the city, they will know that our ships are thinly manned and will therefore understand our ruse. Our army will have to remain hidden within the walls of Kurakapa to convince them that our attack on Panchavati is genuine. The customs officer at Kurakapa frowned at the merchant ship manifest. Cotton from Egypt? Why would any Meluhan want cotton from Egypt? They are no match for our own cotton. The customs procedure in Meluha was based on a system of trust. Ship manifests would be accepted at face value and the relevant duty applied. It was also accepted that, on random occasions, a customs officer could cross-check the shipload if he so desired. This was possibly one of those random occasions. The officer turned to his assistant. Go down to the ship hold and check. The ship captain looked nervously to his right, at the closed door of the deck cabin, and turned back to the customs officer. What is the need for that, sir? Do you think that I would lie about this? You know that the amount of cotton I have declared matches the maximum carrying capacity of the ship. There is no way you can charge me a higher custom duty. Your search will serve no purpose. The Meluhan customs officer looked towards the cabin that the captain had surreptitiously glanced at. The door suddenly swung open and a tall, well-built man stepped out and stretched his arms as he lazily yawned. What's the delay, Captain? The customs officer held his breath as he recognized the man. He instantly executed a smart Meluhan military salute. Brigadier Vidin Maley, I didn't know you were on this ship. Now you know, said Vidin Maley, yawning once more. I'm sorry, my lord, said the customs officer, as he immediately handed the manifest back to the captain and ordered his assistant to issue the receipt for the duty payment. The paperwork was done in no time. The customs officer started to leave, but then turned back and hesitatingly asked, Vidin Maley, my lord, you are one of our greatest warriors. Why isn't our army deploying you at the battlefront? Vidin Maley shook his head with a wry grin. I'm not a warrior now, officer. I'm a bodyguard. And also, as it now appears, a transporter of royal fashions. The customs officer smiled politely, and then hurried off the ship. Why the delay? Asked the Egyptian. Vidin Maley had just entered the hold below the lowermost deck, deep in the ship's belly. The only porthole, high in one corner, had been shut tight and it was unnaturally dark. As his eyes adjusted, he was able to see the countenance of about 300 assassins sitting with cat-like stillness in a huddle. Nothing important, Lord Swath, said Vidin Maley to the Egyptian. A stupid customs officer got it in his head to check the ship's hold. It's been taken care of. We're sailing past Kurakapa now. We will be in the heart of Meluhu soon. There's no turning back. Swath nodded silently. My lord, said the captain, as he entered quietly with a shielded torch. Vidin Maley took the torch from the captain, who was followed by two men carrying large jute bags. They left the bags next to Vidin Maley. Wait outside, said Vidin Maley. The captain and his men obeyed. Vidin Maley turned towards the Egyptian. Swath was the chief of the shadowy group of Egyptian assassins that Vidin Maley was escorting back to Devagiri. The sweaty heat of the closed ship hold had made Swath and his assassins strip down to their loincloths. Vidin Maley could see the several battle scars that lined Swath's body in the dim light of the flaming torch. But it was the numerous tattoos on him that drew his attention. The Meluhan brigadier was familiar with one of them, a black fireball on the bridge of his nose, with rays streaming out in all directions. It was usually the last thing that his hapless victim saw before being butchered. The fireball represented the god that Swath and his assassins believed in. Aten, the sun god. I thought that Ra was the sun god for the Egyptians, said Vidun. Swath shook his head. Most people call him Ra. But they're wrong. Aten is the correct name. And this symbol, said Swath, pointing to the fireball on his nose, is his mark. And the jackal tattoo on your arm? Asked Vidun. It's not a jackal. It's an animal that looks like a jackal. We call it Shah. This is the mark of the god I am named after. Vidun was about to move on to the other tattoos, but Swath raised his hand. I have too many tattoos on my body and too little interest in small talk, said Swath. You are paying me good money, Brigadier. So I will do your job. You don't need to build a relationship with me to motivate me. Let's talk about what you really want. Vidun smiled. It was always a pleasure to work with professionals. They focused their attention on the work at hand. The mission that Emperor Daksha had tasked him with was difficult. Any brute could kill, but to kill with so many conditions attached required professionals. It needed artists who were dedicated to their dark art. My apologies, said Vidun. I'll get down to it right away. That would be good, said Swath, sarcastically. We don't want anybody recognizing you. Swath narrowed his eyes, as though he'd just been insulted. Nobody ever sees us killing, Brigadier Vidun. More often than not, even our victims don't see us while they're being killed. Vidun shook his head. But I want you to be seen, only not recognized. Swath frowned. Vidun walked over to one of the jute bags, opened it and pulled out a large black cloak and a mask. I need all of you to wear this. And I want you to be seen as you kill. Swath picked up the cloak and recognized it instantly. It was the garment that the Nagas wore whenever they traveled abroad. He stared at the mask. He was aware that these were worn during holy celebrations. Swath looked at Vidun, his eyes two narrow slits. You want people to think the Nagas did it? Vidun nodded. These cloaks will constrain our movements, said Swath. And the masks will restrict our vision. We're not trained with these accoutrements. Are you telling me that the warriors of Aden can't do this? Swath took a deep breath. Please leave. Vidun stared at Swath, stunned by his insolence. Leave, clarified Swath, so that we can wear these cloaks and practice. Vidun smiled and rose. Brigadier, said Swath. Please leave the torch here. Of course, said Vidun, fixing the torch on its clutch before walking out of the ship. Hold. Chapter 40. Ambush on the Narmada. They aren't coming here? Exclaimed a surprised Sati. Together with Kali, Ganesh, and Kartik, she had been enjoying a family moment. Accompanied by rounds of sweet saffron milk, they were soon joined by Bhagat, Chandrakatu, Mintli, Brahaspati and Chinardwaj with some fresh news. The information received earlier from the Vasudevs had suggested that a fleet of nearly 50 ships had sailed out of Kurukapa a few weeks back. They had expected them to head for Lothal. But the latest news was that the ships had turned south. It looks like they're heading towards the Narmada, said the Vasudev Pandit who had just walked in with the information. That can't be. A panic-stricken Kali looked at Ganesh. Kali had not agreed with Shiva's tactic of misleading the Meluhans by pretending to go to the Narmada and from there, sailing on to Paria. She was afraid that this would give the Meluhans a clue as to the possible route to Panchavati. Shiva had dismissed her concerns, saying that Brigu knew that the river near Panchavati flowed from west to east, whereas the Narmada flowed east to west. Clearly Panchavati was not on the Narmada itself. The Meluhans would know that, even if they sailed up the Narmada, they would have to pass the dense Standak forests to be able to reach Panchavati. And Doing so was fraught with danger without a Naga guide. Therefore, the news of the Meluhan navy sailing towards the Narmada left Kali with only one logical conclusion: they had discovered the route to Panchavati. How would they know the Narmada path to Panchavati? Asked a bewildered Ganesh. Kali turned on Sati. Your husband did not listen to me and stupidly insisted on sailing towards the Narmada. Kali, the Meluhans are in the know of all our goings and comings on the Narmada, said Sati calmly. It is no secret. But they would have no idea how to travel from the Narmada to Panchavati. Shiva has not given anything away. Bullshit! Shouted Kali. And it's not just Shiva's fault, it's yours as well. I had told you to kill that traitor, Didi. You and your misplaced sense of honor will lead to the destruction of my people. Masi, said Ganesh to Kali, immediately springing to his mother's defense. I don't think we should blame Ma for this. It is entirely possible that it's not General Parvateshwar but Lord Brigu who has discovered the Narmada route. After all, he did know the Godavari route, right? Of course, Ganesh, said Kali sarcastically. It's not General Parvateshwar. And it obviously cannot be your beloved mother's fault, either. Why would the most devoted son in the history of mankind think that his mother could make a mistake? Kali, whispered Sati. Kali continued her rant. Have you forgotten that you are a Naga? That you are the lord of the people, sworn to protect your tribe to the last drop of your blood? Bhagat decided to step in before things got out of hand. Queen Kali, there is no point in going on about how the Meluhans discovered the Narmada route. What we should be discussing is what are we going to do next? How do we save Panchavati? Kali turned to Bhagat and snapped, we don't need to be Maharishis to know what needs to be done. 50 ships will set sail tomorrow with all the Naga warriors on it. The Meluhans will regret the day they decided to attack my people. Kali, Ganesh and Kartik had assembled at Lothal's circular port along with 100,000 men, comprising all the Nagas and many Branga warriors, clambering aboard their ships rapidly. They knew that time was at a premium. Sati had come to the port to see her family off. She was going to stay in Lothal. She suspected the Meluhans might mount a siege on their city at the same time, to try and take advantage of her divided army. Kali approached Sati softly. Kali gave her a withering look and then turned her back on her sister, screaming instructions to her soldiers. Board quickly. Hurry up. Ganesh and Kartik stepped forward, bent to touch her feet and take their mother's blessings. We'll be back soon, Ma, said Ganesh, smiling awkwardly. Sati nodded. I'll be waiting. Do you have any instructions for us, Ma? Asked Kartik. Sati looked at her sister, who still had her back turned stiffly towards her. Take care of your Masi. Kali heard what Sati said, but refused to respond. Sati stepped up and touched Kali on her shoulder. I'm sorry about General Parvateshwar. I only did what I thought was right. Kali stiffened her shoulders. Didi, one who clings to moral arrogance even at the cost of the lives of others, is not necessarily the most moral person. Sati remained quiet, staring sadly at Kali's back. She could see Kali's 2 extra arms on top of her shoulders quivering, a sure sign that the Naga queen was deeply agitated. Kali turned and glared at her sister. My people will not suffer for your addiction tomorrow. Glory, Didi. Saying this, Kali stormed off, verbally lashing out at her soldiers to board the ships quickly. Kanakala couldn't believe what she was hearing. A real shot at peace. This is the best news I have heard in a long time, Your Highness, said Kanakala. Daksha smiled genially. I hope you understand this has to be kept secret. There are many who do not want peace. They think that the only way to end this is an all-out war. Kanakala looked at Vidun Mali, standing next to Daksha. She had always assumed he was a warmonger. She was surprised to see him agreeing with the emperor. Kanakala perhaps thought the emperor is referring to Lord Brigu as the one who doesn't want peace with the Nilkanth. We've seen the loss of life and devastation caused by the minor battle that was staged outside Devagiri, said Daksha. It was only Sati's wisdom that stopped it from descending into a massacre that would have hurt both Maluha and the Lord Nilkanth. Maybe it's his love for Sati that is forcing the emperor's hand. He would never allow any harm to come to his daughter. Whatever the reason, I will support him in his peace initiative. What are you thinking, Kanakala? Nothing important, my lord. I'm just happy that you are willing to discuss peace. You have your work cut out, said Daksha. An entire peace conference has to be organized at short notice. We will name it, in keeping with tradition, after our Prime Minister, the Yagna of Kanakala. An embarrassed Kanakala smiled. You are most kind, my lord. But the name doesn't matter. What matters is peace. Yes, peace is paramount. That is why you must take my instruction of secrecy seriously. Under no circumstances should the news of the peace conference reach Karakapa. Karakapa was where Lord Brigu had stationed himself, along with King Dilip of Ayodhya and General Parvateshwar. Yes, my lord, said Kanakala. A happy Kanakala rushed to her office to get down to immediate work. Daksha waited for the door of his private office to shut before turning to Vidamali. I hope Swath and his people will not fail me. They will not, my lord, said Vidamali. Have faith in me. This will be the end of that barbarian from Tibet. Everyone will blame the Nagas. They are perceived as bloodthirsty, irrational killers in any case. No reasonable citizen here has been able to swallow that frog Nilkanth's championing of the Nagas, just like they didn't accept the freeing of the Vikarmas, regardless of the greatness of Drapaku. The people will readily believe that the Nagas killed him. And my daughter will return to me, said Daksha. She'll have no choice. We will be a family again. Delusions create the most compelling of beliefs. Shiva, Gopal and Tara stood on the foredeck of their merchant ship. The Parians had helped in loading their precious merchandise onto the vessel. With everyone having said their goodbyes, the Nilkanth had just ordered his ship to set sail on the Jamsi. Scheherazade, said Gopal, how long? Tara, please, she interrupted the chief Vasudev. Sorry? My name is Tara now, great Vasudev, said Tara. Scheherazade was left behind in Para. Gopal smiled. Of course. My apologies. Tara it is. What was your question? I was wondering how long you lived in Para. Too long, said Tara. Initially, I had gone on an assignment that Lord Brigu had given me. I had thought that it would be a short stay. He had assigned me to work on the Devyastras with the Vayuputras and said I could return only when he gave his permission. But after I heard of Brahaspati's death, I saw no reason to return. Well, Brahaspati is not too far off now, said Gopal kindly. Just a couple of weeks more on the Jamsi and then we will be sailing east on the western sea to Lothal and to Brahaspati. Tara smiled happily. Yes, said Shiva, playfully cracking a joke on the meaning of jam. But it's all very confusing. The sea that you come to, will be the sea that we go from now. And then we have to travel east on the western sea. Only the Holy Lake knows where we'll finally land up. Tara raised her eyebrows. I know, said Shiva. It's a terrible joke. I guess the law of averages catches up with everyone. Tara burst out laughing. It's not your joke that astonished me. Though I agree, it really was a terrible joke. Thank you, laughed Shiva softly. But what exactly were you surprised by? I'm assuming you think jam means to come to. Shiva turned to Gopal with a raised eyebrow. for it was the chief Vasudev who had told him the meaning. "Doesn't Jam mean to come too?" asked Gopal. "That is what everybody thinks," said Tara. "Except for the Paryans." "What do they believe?" asked Shiva. "Jam is the Lord of Dharma. So, this sea is actually the sea of the Lord of Dharma." Shiva smiled. "But in India, the Lord of Dharma is Yam," said Tara, completing Shiva's statement. "Also the Lord of Death. Exactly. Is there a relationship between the two names, Yam and Jam? Was there a great leader or god called Jam and Pariah?" "I don't know about any relationship between the names. But in ancient times there was a shepherd called Jam who, blessed by the Ahura Mazda, went on to become a great king, one of the earliest in this area. He spread prosperity and happiness throughout the land. When a great catastrophe was to strike, that would have destroyed the entire world, he is believed to have built an underground city which saved many of his people. The citizens of his realm later began to call him Jamshed." "Why Shed?" "Shed means radiant. So Jamshed means the radiant Lord of Dharma."